Hello, friends. Thanks for tuning into this week's Brain Food. The topic for this week, dealing with failure in your professional life and in your personal life. Oh, I love the idea that if you don't fail, you're not trying hard enough, right? I've heard that so many times. In business, the one I've heard so much is if you haven't gotten sued yet, you're not trying hard enough. And that one always cracks me up. And everybody goes, because they know they've gotten sued and they're in business and they've been doing it for a little while. So somebody's going to get cranky along the way and sue you for something, even if it doesn't make any sense. And so I got this idea from my friend Kelly Gwynn over at Direct Trust, and she responded to my request of, hey, do you have any ideas for marketing tips, tech tips, or brain food that I could cover? And she responded and said, hey, I've got a couple things about failure that I've been trying to do in my household, and I have a couple quotes that are kind of my new mantras. And the first one is, perfect is boring. And I love that one. I'll talk about the second one in a second. Perfect is boring. So that reminds me of my software development days. Many of you might not know, I was a hardcore programmer for about 15 years. I was in, .NET, SQL Server, e-commerce, all database work, all kinds of stuff. Total software developer kind of guy. And it was interesting because perfect is boring reminds me of that time when I was doing development, because perfect is expensive when you think about it. There's always good enough. You don't want to be lazy. You don't want to have spaghetti code when you're writing software. But you can write good, decent software and get it done and move on to the next to-do without necessarily writing it in exactly the right number of lines of code and minimizing that code so that it's absolutely perfect, because that could take you 3 hours to write something that would have taken you 30 minutes to write something that's good enough and totally works and is very supported by other developers and that kind of thing. So I love that idea. Perfect is boring. So let's not focus on trying to be perfect in life. And the other one that she had was, today I'll do what I can and let that be enough. And I liked that idea too. And these are all in responses to the idea of failure. And if you look online, there are thousands of failure quotes, and I love so many. There are so many great quotes out there about failure. And for me, I think it's important just to remember you're going to fail, and the most important thing about failure is to not hang your head when it happens. Sometimes that's going to happen and it's out of your control. Sometimes it's going to happen because you made a simple mistake and you're only human. So, if you're making mistakes 20 times a day, there's a different problem and you need to focus up. But if you're making a few mistakes here and there, give yourself a little grace and credit for how many times you do get it right. Back to that thing, if it happens 20 times a day, if there's something that you're struggling with in your world, in your personal or business life that consistently is happening, maybe write a little checklist of things to do so that you can avoid that in the future. Sometimes the act of just writing it down, like, okay, here's what happens. I don't know how to do this, and every time I try, it takes me an hour and a half. Versus just having that little Post-it note somewhere that says, when you need to do this, and it's only once a month that you do it, so that's why you can never get it done right, do these 3 things or 5 things in this order, and it'll work every single time. And what's interesting is once you start following a checklist like that for something you were struggling with in the past, you'll start doing it by second nature. It'll just become part of how you do things. You won't need your checklist anymore. But it took that failure and realizing that you had a problem and that anxiety around that thing that was going wrong to know that you needed to put something in place to fix it. So my message for you guys today is you're going to fail, and give yourself some grace and learn from those mistakes. Don't be too hard on yourself. This is one of those things where we're all trying to be too perfect and go too fast and get it just right. And I'll tell you what, I feel like I do a better job when I let some of those things... First of all, I apologize. I did a video about that a while ago too. If you do make a mistake, especially for a client, it's shocking how far a simple apology will go in mending that relationship or just fixing the problem. So I've done that plenty of times. There's a misspelling on a social media status update, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Or I fat finger the scheduling of something and it goes a little weird or whatever. There's always going to be a mistake. But the reality is 98% of the time it's perfect and it works like clockwork. And so when you do well most of the time, I think you'll find that your clients are willing to give you a pass, especially if you give them a simple apology and recognize, yeah, I messed that up. I'm sorry. That's it. And if they don't give you grace, it might be something to look at. If they're not giving you grace and you're consistently succeeding for them, they're probably looking at you like a vendor and not as a partner. And that's probably something to put on your radar for future. They might be a C-level, ABC category for clients. They might be a C-level category client that might need to be fired in the future if they're not willing to meet you halfway and give you some grace. So anyway, the idea for today is dealing with failure in business. Don't let it get you down. And if you're not failing, if it's always perfect and you don't feel like, if you're watching this video and you're like, I don't ever make mistakes, you are not trying hard enough. I'll tell you that right now. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. Kelly, thank you for the idea for the story today, for the brain food about dealing with failure and some of the quotes. And I wanted to end on one final quote that I found online that I've always loved is, well, there's a couple actually. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of success. Oh, I love that one. And then there's one from Ellen DeGeneres, and I never really watch her. I just found this quote and I loved it. You will succeed and you will fail, and both are important. I hope you're having a great week. I'll see you next time.